You're being a big baby. Today on the Manspace.
Swaddle me.
Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, spacemen. Prepare to be swaddled.
By the seductive voice of Dr. Matt Brown.
I feel like I just watched a TV show where what was it? Somebody was like, sorry, I have to say this first. When I was editing the podcast yesterday, because apparently that's my job, as Mike has pointed out in a previous episode.
You're the only one who has ever done it until I did it the other night.
When I was editing it at the end, I said something about how I needed to tell you guys about a TV show I watched because apparently that's all I do. And apparently that's all I do. So you got
a new show to tell us about, Rob?
No.
Oh.
It was something about somebody was talking about being swaddled and how good it feels. I was like, I don't know what this is like.
This is the opposite of swaddling, but you started Severance again?
Yes. Have you?
I haven't yet because we're at a crossroads.
What?
I don't know if I'm going to be watching it by myself or with Lisa.
Why?
I think, like, for a lot of people that watched it, it was like, this is really good, but man, like, I'm feeling like claustrophobic, having weird dreams.
Oh.
And so
that would happen to me.
So yeah, I don't know. We're watching like 5 shows right now though. So,
well, what else are you watching? I'm running out.
I started watching Shrinking finally.
That's a good one.
And then we're kind of like off and on with that Matlock show.
I haven't seen it.
I have mixed feelings about that.
I do
one.
too, man. I was telling Lisa, like, I really like Kathy Bates, but I hate her in this role.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I like Kathy Bates. I just can't, like, I don't know. Like, I just find myself like partway through the episode, I'm just kind of irritated by her.
Yeah. I think like the sweet Southern grandma, I'm like it gets old. And then knowing that she's like faking it too.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah,
it just feels like she always has the exact right thing to say and the exact like smoothest way to say it. And I'm like,
well, and all I can think is as rich as that woman apparently is, and she's a lawyer, nobody knows who she is. She's able to just go in and pretend to be somebody else.
Right. And she lives close enough that she can drive.
Yeah. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I don't, like, everybody knows who you are, lady.
I think they need to develop a lot more like the actual story, like why she's doing it, because I feel like I could connect with that part of her character. But the other one, I'm just like, this is just.
Right.
So, yeah, we're watching that. We watched
that's where I'm at.
Like some limited series, like twin study thing on like comparing omnivore and vegan diets.
Oh.
And then
you told me about that, I think.
Yeah, just watching a few other, like, trying to remember. I don't know. I feel like we have like 50 things to choose from, which is really weird because oftentimes we're like, crap, we don't have a show. So
that's where I am right now.
Jenna and I finished AP Bio.
I've heard season 3 and 4 fall off.
Yeah, a lot.
I fell off in the end of season 1, man.
I thought you had watched it all the way through, Rob.
No, I have not seen those 2 yet.
Yeah, the fall off in season 3 is like, it felt pretty significant. And then
does it ever develop beyond like?
No.
Okay, that was my issue. It's like he's the same dude.
Yeah,
but it's only funny so many times though.
Nah, it's the other characters, the kids who are way funnier.
It is, and that's like there were some episodes that like they did one that was basically like a tribute to every 90s movie. And it was from the point of view of Victor, who that kid is freaking rad.
Very.
And so he was like the star of it the whole time. And I was just like, okay. But again, it was just like, I was like the whole, like we're watching it for the first like 5 minutes, like what is happening right now? Because it was so like, this isn't what you guys do on the show. Like, what is going on right now? So they had like a couple of like they had one episode that was actually like freakishly funny, but it just like I just kind of be like, I mean, I guess we'll watch it because it's the show we're watching right now. So I guess we'll watch AP Bio. But I just didn't like by the time it was done and the like the final episode, I was like, I don't even know what that was.
Like, did they know it was going to be the final episode, or did they
Probably
like they kind of shot it and thought we'll get another season?
After season 2, it was canceled.
Oh,
and it switched to Peacock.
Oh, that's
and
right.
So it became a streaming only show.
Oh,
and so that was part of what I didn't like is they did what shows often do. They're like, "What? We're on streaming," and so they just kind of exploded things up. And it's like, nah, it was funnier when you. Like, to me, one of the things that I always thought was funniest about Arrested Development was the bleeping.
Yeah, I love that.
Like, that is so much funnier.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, when you see them move to streaming and they no longer have to censor anything, I'm like, well, yeah, but now it's not as funny. Like, it's funny watching you, like, try to do this. And the fact that it's in a high school and suddenly they don't have to do it, even though they're in a high school. And I think, which it's true, teachers freaking talk like sailors, man.
Yeah.
As soon as kids aren't around, I'm like, oh, like, holy, you guys.
No, my favorite bleep scene from Arrested Development is when they're all going off on Lucille, and then Buster just like,
it's just one long beep, and he's getting all angry, and Michael's like, well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Like that kind of thing. It's like, it's way funnier to just hear a long bleep.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right. Well, I guess we should talk about this book, though. I was just sitting here wondering, I wonder if people listening to this are like, you guys probably didn't see this, but AI, I fill in, I usually do the summaries on these things, but I do like to see what AI has to say. So I take their summaries, and I'd have to find it again. But the one for this week, I was like, oh, that's delightful. It said, oh, I found it. It says,
on the one that we recorded,
we just posted. It says, this is what AI said. Each topic is discussed with humor and personal anecdotes, creating a relatable and engaging dialogue. And I was sitting here thinking, I wonder if people are like, listen to 3 middle-aged dudes talk about what TV show they watch. Who gives a crap? Lots of people, dozens of people all over the world. So today we're talking about Spacemen. It's our book club. We should have some sort of like
book club theme song
or like a sign that we do for our book club.
Can we steal the Reading Rainbow?
No, not cool,
Reading
Mike.
Rainbow.
Great. Now we have to delete this episode. I'm not paying for that.
LeVar Burton's going to show up with his Star Trek eyes.
Poor guy. We're talking about the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I will admit, I'll tell you why I picked the book and why it was consistent with what I thought, but also maybe I was like, oh, this is, it's maybe controversial depending on who's reading it. But I picked the book because it goes back to that. I don't know if you guys remember a long time ago, I was reading a bunch of, I want to say like Nietzsche quotes about safety and how kind of I think we're failing our kids a little bit, or even ourselves as humans. We become such a safe society that we're too afraid to ever do anything to push ourselves to become more blah, blah, blah. So actually, I wanted to read this book. My mother-in-law recommended it, but didn't really tell me. I don't think I knew the premise of that. It's kind of based more in the university system setting. Mm-hmm. That's kind of at least the basis of what they're describing. But I do think I had somebody ask me today. They're a teenager, but asking me like, hey, on this form, do you think I need to mark down that I have anxiety and or OCD, like maybe anxiety, but not OCD? And I said, no, you haven't been diagnosed with anything. You just are saying you have some anxious feelings you're trying to work through. You're not on medication and it's not impairing your daily functioning. Like, no, don't mark that down. That will change a whole bunch of stuff. Like, but we've become so emotionally and mentally healthy, quote unquote, that now it's like we have to identify these things all over the place. And so I want to read this book to kind of look at somebody else is saying, maybe they're saying the same thing. We've gone too far this direction. So that, I mean, in short, and I'll thank you, dear overlord of AI. I'll tell you what they say. In essence, the coddling of the American mind argues that excessive efforts to protect young people from discomfort and adversity can ultimately harm them by hindering their emotional and intellectual development. And they advocate for principles of resilience, critical thinking, and ability to engage. And more specifically, I don't want to give too much away because I believe the patron saint of the Manspace once said, hey, since you guys do these book clubs, now I don't have to read the book. And I was like, you turd, read the book. I shouldn't say that to the patron saint. Although, maybe I should put a plug on me. Like, I mean, nothing's been delivered to my house recently.
My doorstep remains
unpatronated. Patronized. So a couple of the key things it does highlight, it starts with the 3 great untruths. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings. And life is battle between good people and evil people. And it kind of goes through to kind of say, this is why that's a problem. And specifically says, kind of goes in the idea that essentially university systems, and even bigger than that, maybe just, with Gen Z, who he calls iGen, which I actually think is a better, it's a better name
term for it.
But talking about how universities actually, maybe unknowingly or knowingly, have encouraged their students to lean into cognitive distortions, some of which could be like this one here. It's a battle between good people and evil people, black or white thinking, that sort of thing. All in the name of being safe, safety-ism, and affirming maybe. So I will say this first before I ask you guys your opinion on this. And as always, keep in mind the end goal of this, that if there is a spaceman who does not read this book, what the take-home message you think should be for them, for men, individually, relationship-wise, kids, that sort of thing. I will say first, and I want to know your guys' reactions for reading this. Matt, I think it's been a while since you've read it, but it's the kind of book that is a little bit hard to read. I've had books like that before. It's not hard. It's hard to read in the context that it makes me a little bit angry as I read it. Mm-hmm. I'm reading things and feeling like I can't believe this happens. And even Matt, I thought reading this book, I thought of a couple of experiences at Tech, things that happened to Beef and Damon, and the Tower of Intolerance, and thinking they were totally victims of this type of thinking that occurred. It's funny you just use the word victim, but or thinking about my students when I was teaching. And why over time teaching at a university became less and less and less appealing to me. It started to feel like, I think I remember I told you guys I had a student who was upset at me because I was being too harsh to the insurance companies, and why are they always the bad guy? These are good people trying to do good things. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm getting in trouble for. I was just talking about insurance.
Students like parent.
He said he worked
insurance company.
He's like, I worked for an insurance company for a while. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying that there's not good people at this company, but they are not set up benevolently. They are set up as a corporation to make money.
Yeah.
Like,
They don't want to give it away.
But it was a moment there where I was like, oh, this environment is now reaching a point where it's like, how am I in trouble for going after the big corporation? What is happening? And all I said was they suck. That's anyway. So reading this, I did have some kind of, I think, some personal reactions, like just remembering different experiences where it felt to me, especially at the university level, you had to be very, very careful of what you said or you were in big trouble.
Yeah.
But, and as Matt points out, this is where, I don't know, I don't think this is where concept creep comes from, but they mention concept creep.
They talk a lot about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But tell me some of your reactions and maybe tell me some things, because I could go off on a few stories that stood out. But before, I will say this, one of the things I was conscious of was I appreciated that the guy reading the book, I don't think he was the first author. I think he was the second author. But he says that he was center left leaning, but that the other guy was more right leaning. Oh, that's not what he said?
No, one of them is more left leaning, but something about libertarians.
That's right.
Then the reader, the second author, John, was
the
centrist.
Yeah.
But
that's
has centrist to left leaning, but really appreciates some conversations and some like writings of some conservative leaning
which
people.
He does say the main author, I think it was the main author, the guy who's the attorney,
Greg.
that he actually has his history was in a whole bunch of places that were very left leaning places.
Yeah.
That he's been an advocate in that direction. So one of the things I liked about that was I felt like they went after the left more than the right. They do kind of, and not even went after, but they highlight, these are just studies and things that they found. But I feel like they were heavier on the left side than they were like attacking the left side, if you want to call it that, than they were the right. But that's the point is not the political divide to me. It's the process of opening up this conversation of like, hey, if this is happening, it should be talked about. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, it was just that, like, that was one thing I really appreciated is for the first part reading the book, because it's one of those where to me, especially in light of what I was reading, I think, oh yeah, some people are going to be really upset about this book, right? Because like the call out culture, I felt like in particular got kind of called out, ironically, and I think, yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing that those people are going to be upset about. Well, how dare you tell me that I'm this or that? And so, like, as I was reading it, partway through, I thought, yeah, people are just going to be like, oh, you're just a bunch of conservative white dudes, because it is two middle-aged white males. And I thought, yeah, that's what they're going to say. And so, like, I actually really liked when I found out that they were both, middle to left leaning.
Right.
And I thought, oh, that, like, my thought was, if I were a liberal reading this book, I would be like, oh, what?
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, like, he went after, and like, clearly I thought, clearly you guys are not fans of, well, he was actually president when they were writing it, President Trump.
Yeah.
Like that part, I thought, whether you're like, before they announced where they thought, I thought, oh yeah, you guys, clearly don't think he's been healthy for our society, which I can't. Anyway. But I liked that they used both examples. And I think one of the things I appreciated most, was how much they explained about their process for it. Like he pointed out, look, kind of don't feel like we're attacking the left. As he pointed out, most schools, and they always have, and it's just increased in recent years, lean left.
Yeah.
They tend to be more liberal in nature. And he's like, so when we're using examples about college campuses, it's usually going to be left, leaning. And he's like, but don't worry, the right has done stuff too. And we'll point that out in this chapter. Where it really is, I thought they did a really good job of just kind of saying, look, we're just trying to get people talking about the problem as we see it.
Right.
And to make them aware of the problem, which was kind of, I felt like the whole point was like, which we've talked about this. I've certainly said it to a bunch of clients. Like, I don't feel like our society is one that currently knows how to disagree. The number of times I've heard people called some kind of phobic or racist or something, and I think because they disagree with you, like they're not actually doing anything to you. They just disagree with you. They see things differently than you do. But to them, the way they, like that they'll interact with me, and they have been like the examples that I'm thinking of as I'm telling it are people that are, they're part of the iGen, the I generation. And so I think, they're kind of like exemplifying the thing they're talking about the whole time, that we've taken this idea of safety too far.
Mm-hmm.
And we've felt the need to label everything, and the labels are starting to get us in trouble. And once you start labeling, like you point out with the kid with the, the OCD and anxiety, and like, once you put a label on it, like in at least this is how it was when I left elementary teaching, they would be really hesitant to put any kind of diagnosis on a kid, particularly ones that were not quite as easily quantifiable, ones like ED or
erectile dysfunction. Yes, in kids, right?
That's in children. That one came up a lot. That one, or like ODD, right? Like they were more hesitant to put those on a kid because once it's there, like it's really hard to get it off. Once the label is on the file, it's hard to remove the label.
I feel like it's always Mike.
Is it me? I'm not the one who's going there.
I mean, just the context of the whole thing. It's too much. Now I'm wondering if someone was listening to Mike and they're going to have to go back and be like, what was too much? They'll be like, Matt and Rob are just little idiot perverts. Yes, I agree with the label thing.
You can't get us back on track like that. Just ask Matt what he has to say.
Matt, what do you have to say about it?
Well, like you said, it's been a while since I read it, so I'm like, I remember the bigger themes, emotional reactions. I can't remember so much, but I think it just really highlights, and particularly for men, like we have a huge need for like trusted, persuasive, and collaborative voices in like that space between harm and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too often, you could just have a really, really polarized discussion about things like this. And I think they do a good job of highlighting in a persuasive way, this is why it's important to lean into that space in between, which is growth and resilience and anti-fragility. And I mean, the proliferation of, like you're saying, of all these labels, like we've had this massive identification of harms across so many fields, and together with that, like an illusion that we can somehow eliminate them,
right?
And that's the goal, right? And then, you know, the flip side is just kind of like a totally uninformed, like, well, life is what it is, like, suck it up, deal with it. And it's like, well, that leaves a whole lot of people in the middle that have no mentor, no guide, no tools really. So most people, if they have to pick a side, are going to pick the safety side. And then you have all these like social outcasts on the other side of, like, you know, trying to tout their masculinity by, you know, standing in front of a pitching machine like Happy Gilmore and taking it in the chest. I think that hurt. No, there's like this huge need for the growth and strength and like lowering of anxiety and depression and everything, that I think as men we need to be like a trusted place to say, you know, I'm not going to let this get out of hand on either side, but follow me and I'll show you how to size this threat up, you know, and approach it in a way that ultimately leaves you stronger on the other side. And I think that one of the things I remember that stood out to me was like the crossover from, I think it was when like the word violent all of a sudden transferred over into the space of words, and how they break that down in a way where it's kind of like, you know, with a logical argument that's impossible. Right. But I do think it's important to highlight that there are extremes on the other side too, where we would all say like psychological abuse is a real thing. Right. And,
sure.
And you can't like say that the opposite of fragile, well, I guess the opposite of fragile maybe would be invincible, but like nobody wants to be either one of those things really. You want to be kind of flexible, adaptive, and resilient, and know your limits and know when to step away from something, because you really like, what are you risking and why? But also I can stay in this a little bit longer because it's helpful and I can grow. But yeah, I think I guess the mindset that's more like, I think what they call now like snowplow parenting instead of helicopter parenting.
I thought it was lawnmower, but yeah.
Well, yeah. I don't just clearing a path,
like either way.
Right?
Yeah. Either way.
Most
anticipating
the most level.
And like sending messages that like, you won't be able to handle what is up ahead. So let me make sure I like neutralize it before you step in the room, basically.
Right.
You know, a lot of particularly at universities, right, where on the one hand, I think the well-intentioned side of it was, if there's anybody in this room that I'm unaware, you know, just like I would be like, hey, if anybody has like, you know, some like anaphylactic reaction to food, let me make sure you know that this has something you're allergic to in it, right? I think like the trigger warning idea was like, hey, if there's anybody in here that this, you know, you're free to like
manage
be informed
yourself
beforehand and step out, right?
Right.
But I think, yeah, taken to an extreme, that's like in an effort to not be wrong and not be like called out as being, you know, insensitive or inducing harm. Let me like overstep that and just make sure everybody's, you know, if this makes you slightly uncomfortable, then I need to give you a warning, versus like, if this is going to be traumatic and you're going to really like go into full blown panic attack mode, you need to know. It's just, I think we've, erred much more on the side, probably from a place of caring, but also I think from a place of looking like good people. You know, I can anticipate people's discomfort and care for it, versus like, what's the best way to help somebody?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that's like, tell me all about your discomfort, and then let's figure out where you want to get to, instead of how do we make sure you never feel it? Like that is like anxiety's recipe every day, all day, night and day, right? Is let's avoid anything that's uncomfortable. And then, no wonder that leads to an increase in anxiety when you just like support it, listen to it, and give voice to it, instead of, leading with principles and values and, things that you're trying to grow into versus run away from. But I think, as men, I think there's like there's a big space, and I think sometimes we squander those opportunities because we come in like morons. like we're just wearing like emotional bulletproof vests, and everybody should just take it on the chest, or we just become almost like second position where we're supposed to be leading a charge, right? We kind of just defer. And I think it's a risky thing to step out there and say, I have something to say about this, and I have the capacity to consider your position on this, and I have the capacity to dialogue with you and speak persuasively about the things that I think are valuable here. And I think we leave a lot of things on the table.
Well, and that's I think that's something that I really kind of appreciate about this is at no point as they're like, because I've met with a lot of people, and as I talk with parents in particular, like a lot of the dads, are just like, it's almost like they're doing the reverse of the snowplow parenting or lawnmower parenting, where it's like, no, I'm going to put as many obstacles in your way to toughen you up.
Yeah.
Which, like, I appreciated that they didn't seem to be doing that either. Like, It was almost more like, no, just let your kids be kids. Like, you don't, like, the world will take care of beating them up. You don't need to do it. You don't need to make it harder for them. And so I appreciated that it was saying, like, yeah, you need to let them be uncomfortable. You don't need to push them down into the pit. I also really appreciated that one, like they pointed out, and I did have a little bit of mixed feelings about it when they would point out, like, they would talk about how words aren't violence. And then there would inevitably be a line or two where they would say something along the lines of, we're not trying to be dismissive of, like, emotional abuse and things like that. Where I get it. Like, I get why they couldn't explore more, but there was a couple of times where it was like, it just feels like you're like, oh, we probably need to throw that in there. But on the whole, I do think to me, I get why they didn't. And the point they were trying to make is no, like, yes, those things are real, but on the, like, just from a literal standpoint, a word cannot physically hurt you. And violence had always been referred or been reserved for physical danger and physical attacks, not emotional ones. And they're like, so no, if a word can't physically hurt you, then it can't be considered violence. Which to me, like, that's where I think the concept creep has come in, because we know, and I mean, like, we work with enough people, we know, like, one, you can have some pretty strong emotional, like, if your emotions get to a certain point, it can very much produce a physical reaction in your body. And so, like, yeah, there's connections there, but I do think it was right. It's that idea of concept creep, and an attempt to, and like, like, as you were talking, Matt, I thought, oh, I've actually done that as a therapist, where if I have something I know that my client's not going to want to hear, I will spend probably more time than I should trying to figure out how to phrase it to cause the least amount of whatever. And then ironically tell them, like, 2 minutes later, sometimes it's going to hurt, so just say the thing you need to say to your spouse. And I'm like, well, I didn't just do it. I think we do often from a place of, I don't want to cause pain if I don't have to. And so we'll step in a way to try to, I don't know. I feel I'm rambly. Rob, jump in there, or Matt.
Well, here's Here's what I think is interesting is, yes, I think you guys are both saying it's true. Any of this safetyism that's occurred, it's not like it occurred with people with malintentions, right? This was all motivated by let's make sure people are okay. But I do like that quote from the beginning of the book. Prepare your child for the path, not the path for your child, or whatever the
prepare the child for the road,
is.
not the road for the child.
Which I think, man, that's so much more valuable because you can't make your kids safe enough that eventually they can go and demand the world be safe. It will not occur. But it was all well intentioned. I think as you guys are talking, I think this, saying what I want men to do is to be well informed. And to be well informed, you have to have information from all sources and be open to the possibility that what if this is correct or, more right or whatever, which is what they talk about at universities. Students could start essentially saying, you cannot bring that person here. But universities were saying, that's what we do. We are supposed to expose you to thinking. And that's what I love so much about grad school is that grad school, we'd sit in a room and talk about the thing we just read for 3 hours. And it forced me to have to listen to somebody else's point and to say, oh, okay, yeah, I can hear that. I can see that. But this, and this has happened too with, even in our field, there's so many people where I've asked them, they'll say, and I can't even claim to do this all the time, but I've done it in a certain topics where they'll say, hey, best practice according to, this organization or this organization is that you will do this based on this research. And I will ask, have you read that research? And their answer is no. And I'll say, okay, go read the research because it doesn't say what this organization says it's saying. Mm-hmm. In fact, anyway, I can go on a big old rant about that, but I won't. And so I feel like it takes more effort, but it better prepares our future generations to be ready for the road if we are well informed. So even little things like I've told you guys, I read, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to get an email called The Flip Side where it would take one topic and say, here's what the right says about it and here's what the left says about it. And sometimes I find like, oh, these guys make a good point, but these guys also make a good point. And so I felt like I had a well-balanced perspective of whatever this topic was. And unfortunately, I was never that confident on any topic. It was always like, I could go both ways on this, but I feel like that's more informed, which also brings me to this idea when you guys are talking about, this is the real downfall of concept creep. It's also the downfall of actually labeling things. The fact that Matt, you said this, and Mike, you're pointing out that the author said this, that like, we're not trying to say that there are not people out there who are not experiencing physical or emotional or psychological abuse. However, right, we've said that on previous episodes because we have to say, hey, we're not saying this doesn't happen.
No, yeah.
But some clients will say to me like, well, this and this is the trauma that I experienced, and they'll tell me, and I have said, that's not trauma. And some people have been very offended by what I said. Because what happens when you do this thing where the concept creeps into everything is trauma, but we're also kind of this or that or black and white thinkers. It's like, well, if I say that's not trauma, that means I'm dismissing it and it was not a big deal to you and it's you're overreacting. I'm not saying that. I am saying, hey, look, this was a big deal to you and it had real big ramifications for you that we need to work through and understand, but it was not trauma. And so I think it's important to know the difference in those things to understand that, like, if I were to say to somebody, even somebody saying to me, I think my husband's a narcissist, and I say, he's not a narcissist. It doesn't mean you're not having a bad experience in your marriage, but he's not a narcissist. Stop making that thing be the explanation for everything.
Sometimes a better label for that is just a-hole.
Right, exactly.
I was going to say, like, I saw somebody post that the other day, like, it's okay. Your ex probably is an a-hole, but they're probably not a narcissist.
Probably not a narcissist.
Well, and
well, I was just going to say that's why I think one of the things I loved about this book was, in some ways, it's saying, hey, stop calling everything that, because it now makes it, we either have to say that was trauma, that your brother once called you a fatty when you were 7, or we're saying that doesn't matter and it's no big deal. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to watch how concept creep and cognitive distortions can overlap on each other. Anyway, go ahead, Mike.
No, to me, there's an aspect of power that gets involved here. I always have a little bit of a hard time when clients tell me they're broken, because visually I know what they're seeing, right? And something that's broken is very difficult to put back together. It's not an easy fix. And, in their minds, but you'll always be able to see the cracks. And I think, right, so let's not view ourselves that way. Like, you can be stronger than you had been in the past, right? Which is not typically something you can say, right? Like, if I break a dish, no, next time it drops, I can almost guarantee it's going to split right where it already did. And so there is something to me to be said about that idea of not allowing the language we use to diminish how we see ourselves, to see ourselves as less, to see ourselves as not as capable because of, or to inadvertently, right? Well, my spouse is a narcissist, right? There's so much that goes into that word that I think, yeah, you've just given your spouse a whole bunch of power over you with the label. And there's a real danger in that to me, just in how we see ourselves.
Well, and I think one of the big missed opportunities with it too is sometimes when somebody, labels something a certain way, it's like maybe the real issue there is you do have feelings and experiences around that you don't value sufficiently to deal with or recognize, unless it's attached to trauma, a diagnosis, somebody else's diagnosis. And when somebody's attempting to help you reword that, like you said, it's not me saying that wasn't significant, but the resilience opportunity here is for you to say, those feelings I had about that are important, period. And if I don't believe that, then I'm going to have to somehow convince myself or others that it did matter, but I'm still holding on to that doubt. So if I can just go to that experience and value it enough to give voice to it and work through it and learn from it and decide, what do I want to do with it, right? Then I'm better able to make the decision, if it's what I need to do, to let go of something, or to make the decision to advocate for something. But if it's just tied to this label, my only option really is to kind of hold on to it, because I haven't even really held it. I've just held the label that I've attached to it, and I spend my time there and look for people that agree with that and people that disagree with that, and align myself with the people that agree with it, and cut myself off from people that disagree with it. And then I'm kind of in this safe zone, but still holding the doubt and the wound. Like, I haven't been able to really get at it. And, but I understand why people would not want to get at the wound, because it's a hard thing to do. But I think as therapists, that's a really important role that we have, which is, your experience has to matter to you enough that you'll tell me about it, and that you will feel it and work through it with me. Otherwise, yeah, we will have to kind of get into a conversation where I'm giving you a label that validates its presence and justifies its existence. And then we just let it kind of set up camp. Right. And then that becomes a part of you that's inaccessible.
That's what I think is interesting about the labeling thing, whether it's trauma or I have this diagnosis or whatever it is. I mean, so often lately, because there's been a spike in adult ADHD diagnoses, I feel like I'm hearing all the time everything being explained. Well, I have ADHD, and so this is, and I feel like, Okay, that doesn't explain everything. But what we do is when we get that label, we like to put this in a box and then it's over there. It's like, okay, there. And I don't actually have to look and understand it and process through it and say, what does this mean for me? So if it's trauma, I can declare that label of trauma and I get the validation for people knowing I have a trauma, but I don't have to go and open the box up and say, okay, what does this actually mean for me? And how do I process through this? And the same thing happens actually with these topics that, as men or women, but as humans, we have this pattern now of like, it's funny to watch people like take up a cause for 15 minutes. And this is their cause for 15 minutes. And then it's not their cause anymore. It's like, remember back when you used to care about that thing and now you don't?
Everyone used to care about the environment.
Yeah.
Lindsay.
And then she locks herself in a cage. But then what happens when we do that, though, is we lose the idea of like, well, you should, as men, stand up and show your kids and those you love for like, I stand up for things I believe in. The things you believe in should be based, you should be standing up for principles and values that you believe in. And so sometimes that means you might advocate for this cause or that cause because it's connected to this value or principle. But that way you're going to hopefully be more well-reasoned around this principle. And if you are more well-reasoned, you're less likely to say you can't speak because you're open to saying, let me understand what you're trying to tell me, because we may actually connect on the same principle, but the means to get there may be different. And so that's fine. But I think that way you're much more likely, for example, with trauma, to say, no, this was a really hard experience for me. So I'm willing to get in and understand that experience. Not so much that I have to say I have trauma and my parents did this to me. I guess I have a little thing on my shoulder there about that because I feel like I hear that a lot. But we're already running out of time because one of us has a client. I guess I'm running out of time and maybe you guys aren't and you can keep going. I think I don't know if you guys have extra thoughts. It's like, this is my take home thought. But to me, that in my mind, it's that, hey, start to look at the underpinnings of what you're actually talking about. Stop labeling things so fast. Labeling doesn't actually really help people very much. It tends to put us in victim and safety-ism and us versus them. And instead open yourself up to like, okay, what is it that I actually am looking at here? And can I be open to hearing and challenging my own ways of thinking? Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Yeah, the only critique I would have.
Oh yeah. Critique.
Just because I think it goes against what they're trying to drive at is like they label it anti-fragility, and I'm like, I get what they're saying, but it's like that points me away from something. It doesn't point me towards anything, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that we do much better. We already have enough we already have the whole premise of the book is like, quit creating things that we're supposed to avoid. And then, well, here's one for fragile, right? But so I think like, yeah, just viewing it as growth, evolution, and strengthening, and the ability to exist more confidently in your space. I think is a much better way of looking at what they're trying to drive at, I think.
Excellent point.
Well, that's and I guess these are my take-home thoughts. Like, to me, the word, because I kind of struggled with the idea of anti-fragility. I didn't actually think about it in the way you talked about, Matt, until just now, and I thought, oh, that's exactly what they've done. And the worst part was they framed it as a negative. And our brain has an inherent reaction to things that are framed negatively. And so I think, well, that's probably not better. Resilience, as you were talking to me, I thought I used to, when I would talk to parents about kids and they would, well, but my kid and changing classes. And I'm like, no, your kid's fine. Like, kids are way more resilient than we give them credit for. Like, it doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but your kid will be fine. Like, your kid can handle much more than you think they can. I guess my my takeaway, I kind of loved the idea that they pushed, well, or at least it's what came, one of the things that came through to me was this idea of, yeah, but what if you're wrong? Like, what if this thing that you think is wrong? And to me, anytime we go into a conversation with somebody who disagrees with us, we have to be willing to accept that that's the outcome of the conversation, that the outcome of the conversation is I find out I was wrong. Because I think, to me, if we're not open to that possibility, we're not really listening. We're not really listening to try to understand. We're just going to look for flaws in their argument. Mm-hmm. And that there's a difference, right? There's a difference between listening to understand and just looking for a flaw. And so, as you engage with people that disagree with you, which there's seemingly no shortage of in the world today, be willing to listen, to truly listen, and ask yourself, what if I'm the one who is misunderstanding something? What if I'm the one who's not seeing it? Because you can't control them anyway. You can only control you. So start with those questions and see where they take you.
Solid. What's your book?
All right. Yeah, what's the pick for next time, Spacemen?
Lessons for Living by Phil Stutz.
Is this Jonah Hill's
This is Jonah Hill, psychiatrist, yeah. Or counselor, yeah.
Whatever he is.
Which, admittedly, based on some things I read about his documentary, I didn't see the documentary. I might watch it now.
Don't. It's going to make you want to punch Jonah Hill.
Well, yeah, so that was the thing. And part of me is I'm like, he's probably misquoting Stutz.
I feel confident he is.
Because some of the stuff that he said Stutz told him, I'm like, how does that guy have a license? Like, oh, your anxiety's too much, just don't do it. And I think, what the crap? So, but I like the subtitle of it is What Only Adversity Can Teach You.
Nice building on this then.
Right? That's what I felt like. So
you nailed it.
Yeah, it felt like a good tie-in.
My next book after that is going to be Take It in the Nuts by Happy Gilmore.
So, man, prepare your nuts and come back next time and join us on the Manspace. Life is a highway. I want to ride it all night long. But Tom Cochran and not Rascal Flatts.